Alright, this video is going to be on BEK Encounters. The reason why I bring this up, I will bring up at the end. These particular three instances, I will bring that up at the end. This first one is from around 1990. I don't have the specific date, but I have the general date that is the same with the rest of these, which sucks, but it's the best you can get on the internet. One night when my mom was in the yard at the hospital having a smoke, which apparently she did often, two boys about 12 years old approached her, and over the fence, in perfect Romanian, they told her, "We need help," to which she responded, "Me too." The boys then turned around, looked her in the eyes, and said, "We know." My mom told her every fiber from her body told her to run as far away as she could, run back home. But how could she? I was on my deathbed inside the hospital. The boys looked normal, except the fact they had deep dark eyes, dark as in everything completely black. It was if they were completely missing the eyes. They had no white, no pupils, no retinas, nothing. Pure darkness. My mom told me she wanted to run, but at that moment she hardly believed anything worse than me dying could happen. She just hoped this wasn't a joke, and that's it. She didn't care whether they were demons or angels. She just wished it was not a sick joke. "Let us in," I said. "It's open," my mom responded. "Invite us in," and she did. "Bring us the child and we will cure him," they said as they walked in. My mom told me everything happened so fast she hardly remembers the actual facts, so her mind was trying to put things in the story. Things that weren't there, to explain what happened to herself, maybe. But she told me that when she went up, took me from my bed, went down, and opened the front door from the inside, let the boys inside, and gave me to them. One of them looked at me and then kissed me on the lips. She wanted to scream and take me away, but the other was blocking her. She told me she felt at that exact moment, "This is crazy." But she also told me that I have to understand how desperate she was, and I do. Anyone who would remember how painful it is to have bone marrow extracted from your feet and from your back when you're just 1 year old. As soon as the boy kissed me, the other one pulled out a necklace, my necklace, and told her, "Make sure the boy wears this necklace at all times, until the day he dies, which won't be in your lifetime." My mom told me she was already feeling giddy just hearing these words. After hearing the doctors tell her to prepare everything for my departure every day, this was a welcome turn of events. The other boy gave me back to her, and just like that, they were gone. My mom put my necklace to my neck immediately and went inside. Now, I don't know how accurate the next part is, but apparently the next morning I was crawling around on the floor like any toddler would at that age, which was a miracle because I was supposed to be 90% dead like the night before, but I wasn't. Sorry for the hiccup in the middle there. There's some typos. And this is a direct quote from the source, so the source has typos. Ain't great? That particular account is unique because black-eyed kids don't help people normally. They don't desire to help people normally. It's usually what happens is a sinister sort of feeling where you freeze or you fight or flight, but most people freeze and then fight or flight. But with them in particular, it's always flight, never fight. You know, I've not read a single account of them punching kids in the face, for instance. But you have that feeling, which causes those three things, and then you don't let them in. Well, these next two are accounts of what happens if you do let them in, which, as far as I can tell, they were also on a podcast, but I have not found said podcast anywhere, and even though my post got taken down on Reddit, which I'm still salty about, but that's fine. If it was on a podcast, it was on a podcast, and that technically counts as reposting. Fucking mods, though, I swear to God, they're fucking shit. Rant over. Next part. This is around 2016. The next one's also 2016. This is in Vermont. Let me start by saying that I know how hard this will be to believe. But more typos. But now that I feel I should share this story with someone, and your website seems like the right place. I made the mistake of letting the black-eyed kids inside, and now I'm worried that I might die because of it. I hope this will be a warning to everyone who is ever in the position to make the same mistake that I did. Now, for the record, I would let them in for science. Because I'm sick of reading all of these same accounts where nobody does except these three, and this shit happens. I am sick of it. I am fucking sick of it. Because the only thing that happens if you let them in is bad omens and a bunch of other bullshit and cancer, which I will get back to. Continuing with the narrative here. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband and I lived in a small home in a dirt road just off the rural route in the town. It was in the middle of the snowstorm, and the nearby hills get very slippery in the snow, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident and broken down. It's happened before. When I looked out the window, I could see that our motion spotlight was on. I could see that there were footprints in the snow that had come from our road and into our driveway, but there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road, and no one had driven on it for at least a couple hours. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband up just to feel safer. While I was telling him what was going on, the banging on the door started again, and my husband went to answer it while I stood in the hallway. When he opened the door, there were two children standing in the snow looking toward the ground. They were a boy and a girl and could not have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely and had odd haircuts. The girl's hair was very long and straight, and the boy had a dated haircut that looked almost like a bowl cut. They were dressed for winter, and my first thought was that they must be Mennonite children, but as far as I know, there's never a Mennonite community near us. Thinking back on it, I know that my normal reaction to seeing children in a snowstorm would have been to rush them inside and bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa, but that's not how this felt. Children were very unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked them if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, "What do I do?" And I asked the kids where their parents were. "They'll be here soon," is all they said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning at this point. So the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident, or these kids got lost. As much as my instincts told me to not bring them inside, I did it anyway. I went into the kitchen to make them some hot cocoa. When my husband took them into the living room, while I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to the kids. He was asking if they were okay, where they came from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-songy voice. They weren't afraid to be in a stranger's home at all. I started to notice that our cats, we had 4, were all hiding except Pigeon, who was in the kitchen with me. Normally our cats are very curious and friendly, and we have to be careful that they don't run out of the door when we leave. This time none of them even tried to see who was here, which I thought was very strange. All of the hair on Pigeon's neck was standing up and his tail was puffed up, while looking into the living room. When I bent down to pet him and see what was wrong, he hissed and started growling and backed up until he hid himself under the kitchen island. I've never seen him do that before. When I walked back into the living room, the kids were sitting on the couch, as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he just said he felt very dizzy all of a sudden, and that he was fine. I turned back to the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside of me not to drop the mugs and run away. When they looked at me, their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could and show them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband to ask him if he had seen their eyes. He had seen them too, and said it looked like his brothers It looked like his brother's badly bruised eyes after a car accident. We were in the middle of talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He'd never had nosebleeds as long as I've known him. I just knew inside myself that this had something to do with the kids in the bathroom, and I started crying while I ran to get my husband some tissues. That's when the power went out. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room, and as I started to walk back through the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The two children were standing at the end of the hallway. They weren't moving, and I'd never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boys said, "Our parents are here," and they walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. My husband jumped up to go close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw two men standing by a black car idling in the end of their driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black-colored suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got inside the car, and drove off. Our power came on about an hour and a half later, but nothing was the same after that. Over the next few months, 3 of our cats went missing. We can only assume that they ran away somewhere and never came back, but the worst was coming home to find Pigeon and a puddle of blood on the living room floor. It looked like he had been vomiting blood. The vet told us that he had some kind of hemorrhage. After my husband's nosebleed became a regular event, I went to see the doctor. He didn't know what to make of it other than dry nasal passages. But my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. When the doctor asked if he used tanning beds, we both thought he was joking, but apparently this is kind of melanoma is linked to overuse of indoor tanning. The doctors think he will recover, but don't understand how it got so bad so quickly. My husband has never worked an outdoor job and spends relatively little time in the sun. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds on a regular basis. I've had other issues which I won't mention here, but trust me when I say that I'm suddenly in a worse condition of my life and no one can do anything about it. I know all this is because I let the black-eyed children in my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids that showed up that night, but no one else saw them, and some laugh at how scared we were of the Mennonite kids. But we know what we saw. I wish my husband never opened that door. So in that case, it's skin cancer. Whatever you think about the story, it might just be that. Because of where I got it. I can't confirm any of this. I can just confirm that I think I found the original posting location, and I think that's where everybody else got it from, because it specifically says before that. Yeah, it's from that specific website. It's Wicked something. I can post it in the description if you like, if it's requested. I don't think it's needed because I just read the whole thing. Because basically that whole story is quoted or paraphrased by a bunch of other websites. This is directly from the source, as is this next one, and it's the same website. So the trustworthiness of the website is basically, that's it. As far as reliability goes. Now this next one is around 2016, so as I said before, I don't have specific dates, which sucks because I hate how anecdotal shit is. But, oh well. Moving on. This is near Arcata, California. My friend took a long road trip to see a friend near Arcata, California. They visited, said their goodbyes, and he stopped by a bar to have a drink before going to his hotel for the night. The bartender was a beautiful woman. My friend was extremely attractive. And she served him and chatted and smiled. After a few more drinks, the woman told him he could stay at her place. She said to leave his car there and she would drive him back the next day. As her place was hard to find and somewhat remote, he took her up on it. He told me later that he began to be very fearful when they arrived at her home. She took him to her room, and of course the inevitable sex experience. He said that he was actually frightened of her then as well, as she was not acting normally and sounded almost inhuman in a way. Which, to be fair, During sex, that's the case sometimes. Bad memories. Anyway. After laying in bed for a while, the woman had fallen asleep and he got up to go get water from the kitchen. As he was walking to the sink, he saw numerous small, frightening-looking children walking to and fro about the place. It was a large 2-story house. He wondered what they were doing up at 2 to 3 a.m. and if they had school the next day. He also said that they looked at him with completely black eyes and he was terrified of them, that he had a horrible feeling about them. Turns out the woman owned the bar and she did return him the next day. She forced him out and he had to walk to the highway. I met up with him about a week or two later, and he seemed perfectly fine, but a little frazzled. About a month later, this extremely healthy, athletic individual was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and no medication or treatment would impact his condition. He believed it was directly related to the experience with the black-eyed children in Arcata. He died about 6 months after his diagnosis. So that sucks, as does the last one. But what is there to get from this? Well, if those last two are actually accurate, which the first one's a special case, so I'll get back to it. But those last two, they come from the same website, from viewers of said website. So there is the validity therein. Now, as far as the details, they're reasonably written stories with other than the typos, with reasonably written conclusions and all the rest of it. And the skeptic, or the James Randi individual, if that's his name, I think that's his name, I can't remember, were to look at this and be like, well, anecdotal evidence is the least reliable of all the evidences. And if you were just to take these facts at their best value and were to ignore the black-eyed kids in this story, well, they just got cancer and it just happened to be around that time. Well, then there's, the black-eyed kids themselves. Well, the problem with, a lot of people bring up the contacts. That's $60 to $70 for a prank where you can't see shit, and it's very, not painful, but very annoying to have in your eye. And you think that kids are gonna do that. See, that's what just bugs me. It's like, no kid is gonna think of this elaborate fucking scheme, even if they're smart. That's not a smart idea. Spending that much money, first of all, isn't a smart idea when you're that young. But you're a kid, you don't know any better. Okay, fine, you do. But then to have the idea to do this, say the specific things like it's a script and not break script. You're telling me a kid is that good of an actor that he won't break script? I mean, have you noticed how many child actors that there's very few that are that good? And they have to, and if they were that good actors, they would be doing other things other than pranking people, you'd think, The prank idea is very unlikely, is what I'm saying. And having the eye thing is also unlikely. Other things to explain. There's a specific medical condition, I can't remember what it's called, where you do not have the black part of the eye. You only have the colored part. That doesn't explain how the whites are completely gone. Other things like that, So essentially, we're looking at like a Bigfoot scenario where all we have is anecdotal evidence and the like. and the outcomes that people claim were caused by the presence of these people within the time frame of them getting sick. But the one thing I want to point out overall is cancer. Now, let's say these things actually do exist. It appears that they, as crazy as this sounds, give off radiation or manipulate. See, that's the thing. How do you cure cancer with a kiss? What do you specifically do? It sounds crazy. It sounds impossible. It sounds like magic. I haven't a fucking clue. The closest thing I can think of is something to do with fucking stem cells, but that has nothing to do with. That has nothing to do with kissing somebody. There has to be fucking surgery. You take a needle, you inject it into the place, and then the stem cells hopefully fix the problem. And it's not a regenerative. I mean, stem cells aren't. It's semantics if you want to say it's not regenerative, because technically it's a blueprint sort of thing, where you use said stem cells on a specific location. They interact with the other cells, again, because they're a blueprint for any other sort of thing. They turn into said cells. This is a very, again, juvenile way of explaining it. They turn into said cells. And then damn it. Always the wrong time. And no, I'm not editing. Fuck off. It's a long enough video. If you made it in this far, you already seen how crazy I am, so there you go. Stem cells. That's how they work. Is you inject it into a location, it interacts with the cells in that location, and then starts healing, basically, the area by producing more of healthy cells in that area. So it fixes it like that. Now with cancer, you can assume that that would work in a similar way, injecting it in the location. But that's the thing. It's the lungs. So what, it breathes? Thinking about this like it could actually be possible. Somehow, what do you bleed into the mouth? Like, or something? Because there's stem cells in adult blood. But I'm not a scientist. I don't know how this shit works. Basically, I'm saying this entire thing is absurd. These 3 accounts are absurd. But I can't help but notice the similarity of being cancer. Why, when you let them in, cancer? That's the only, other than some other instances where bad omens sort of things, where bad shit starts happening to them after the fact. But yeah. Stem cells are the thing about stem cells in this case is I have no idea how the fuck you would transmit it to fix it. That and it's 1990. Stem cells were around. Stem cells have been around since I believe they were starting to be used in the 60s. I read that somewhere, that I think they were discovered as a potential use in the 60s. But my only guess is that these black-eyed kids give off radiation, or they can manipulate stem cells in the sense to fuck with and give cancer that way. Because the negative effect of stem cell usage is the cells don't react correctly and they create the wrong type of cell, which would then create a tumor. Or they create too much of useless cells in another way at the site and create cancer. So that's that. It's complicated and confusing and absurd. But the first account stands out to me just with how batshit it is, if you will. And yet apparently he's alive, or at least he was circa 2013. Then poof, disappears. You'll figure out who I'm talking about in later posts. I'm not going to be so direct at this time. Anyway, that's just all I really wanted to say about that. There's this absurd idea in my head that it has something to do with radiation and stem cells, but I have no idea how the hell they would be transmitted or any of that sort of shit. Basically, it's fucked, and I don't know why. That's all I have to say about that anyway.